In today's new episode of Missing, we are playing a live show that we did a couple of weeks ago with author Eli Frankel. Eli Frankel talks about his new book, Sisters in Death, a book that Lance and I both really enjoyed. And just going to give a quick warning here, this conversation does veer into graphic territory a little bit because we are talking about two graphic and very disturbing murders, so please take care while listening. All right, we hope you enjoy this. Check out Eli's book. There are links in the show notes. All right, we're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Eli Frankel. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Missing CSM. Thanks a lot for listening. We are here with a very special guest tonight for this live show. It is Mr. Eli Frankel. Eli, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be here with you guys.
We are thrilled to have you here. We're thrilled to have this live opportunity, to have you on live to talk about your new book, which is coming out tomorrow, right? Sisters in Death?
Yeah, tomorrow.
Tomorrow, the Black Dahlia, the Prairie Heiress, and their hunter. It actually blew our minds when we read this book, because we've heard of the Black Dahlia. Everybody in the true crime sphere has heard of the Black Dahlia, and you kind of broke a lot of the stereotypes. You broke a lot of the chains that kind of bind this case into like the common thinking. Like a lot of people have preconceived notions of this, and you shook free of that, and it was really sort of a revelation to read it. But you've also been on the show a couple other times to talk about other LA crimes. I'm going to wrap this long intro into you up and just have you. Can you introduce yourself to the audience? Anyone who hasn't heard who you are, a little bit about your background?
Yeah, no problem. By the way, thank you for that amazing intro. I couldn't have written that better myself. That was amazing. Thank you. And I love that, kind of shaking it free of the whatever, the chains around it. Yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't thought of it in that context, and that's terrific. Yeah, so I don't know, just a regular kid from rural North Carolina. I came out to Los Angeles for college. I went to film school, and I've been a television and documentary producer for 25 years plus. It's crazy. And then I've also always been a huge true crime fan. I created and executive produced the MGM Epics documentary series Helter Skelter that kind of came out of my obsession, if you will, with the Manson case, Charles Manson. And then, but Black Dahlia has always been sort of the most passionate case for me. And so I've been reading everything I can get my hands on for the last 20 years. I was really just a passive hobbyist, just like, this is a fascinating case, like it is for so many true crime fans. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I started kind of deep diving, getting a little deeper in the weeds on it, starting to call people who were tangentially involved in the case, really just as a hobby. And then I kind of stumbled upon some information that really blew the case wide open for me. And at that point, I just started thinking, there's more to discover here, more than kind of what everybody knows and is sort of in the basket of the Black Dahlia. And at some point, I'm not even sure. I thought, you know what, there's enough here to really tell a story that's worthy of a book. And that did happen, and here we are.
Super cool. Well, it is riveting. I cannot wait to see what the public's reaction to your book is and the information in the book, what that does to the true crime community. It's a notorious case. There have been many books written about the case and proposing killers. What sets your book apart from those? Yeah,
I mean, I think that the big part of the research project for this, which was years long, was I wanted to separate myth from fact. There's so much that has been sort of distorted and turned into mistruth with the case, and not even just about Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, the myriad people around her. It's also the environment and what was happening at the time, and her movements, where she was, why she went to certain places. The story had been told and retold a million times, but there was so much detail lacking, and also motivation. Why were certain people doing things? Why was she going here? What was she looking for? I think three-dimensionalizing the story, finding the heart. Who is she? Who is this, this person we constantly refer to as a victim? How do we take her out of just that victim basket and turn her into a three-dimensional person, a living, breathing person with emotions and goals and ambitions? I wanted to know who she was, and, from there proceeded a really kind of monumental research project, at least for me, and got me to this point.
All right. So when you say monumental research project, how does this differ from the producer role that you play in any other project that you take on? Because you said, you've been producing for like 25 years. That's your career. You obviously do research in the productions that you take on for television, but how did this differ? When did it become like, something I work on like after 9 p.m.? To something that's like real.
Yeah, totally. And that's exactly what it was. I mean, for a long time, it was like, okay, the kids are asleep. They're put to bed. Now I have a few hours to actually work on this project that I'm kind of keeping secret, but I love. Gosh, how do I put this? I mean, in terms of like what the project was, I really started from the point of view, not of trying to find a suspect, not trying to find a killer. Who did this? Like I said, I really wanted to start from the point of view of Elizabeth Short and get to know her. And in so doing, it really required looking for documentation and testimony in places that hadn't been looked at before. And then I was able to make, I know this sounds crazy, but really organized charts of exactly where she was on what day, who she was associating with, who were all the people that we know she came into contact with. And then I started researching all of those people, which, ran into the hundreds. And then eventually there were a few names that began to kind of rise up out of the saga that to me really merited further investigation that had never been fully looked at before. It was always sort of the same 5 or 6 names that people were interested in. And those folks had been kind of picked clean of information about their lives and their motivations and where they were and how they came into contact with her. But what was really striking to me was that there were some suspects and some people in her life that nobody had looked at. And so it was like there was this huge research project in front of me, but nobody had gone down that path yet. And to me, that was really exciting.
Super cool. Now, you said that you discovered some information that sort of sets you on a track. I'm wondering what that information is.
Yeah. So one of the kind of most influential moments in my research project was I was able to get in touch with Betty Bersinger, who was the woman who originally found the body in 1947. She's the first person to see it. I had questions for her, the aspects of the way the body was found that I couldn't reckon really with what the reports were, what the newspaper and the cops reported. It just didn't make sense. So I thought, hey, I'll get in touch with her. I don't even know if she's around. It turns out that she was 102 years old and in great mental shape. She remembered everything from her life. And I had some pointed questions for her. And what she revealed to me was that the way that people think the body was left, the very famous scene, if you will, in front of Norton Avenue, in front of, spectators walking by, this very obvious tortured form severed in two, left by the sidewalk, that was not what she found. And in fact, she found the body 14 feet away, 12 to 14 feet away, hidden in the weeds, which was astounding to me because the whole beginning of anybody telling this story, every book, every article, every podcast begins with a 26-year-old woman walking down the street, pushing a stroller with her 3-year-old daughter. She turns to her right in front of a weed-strewn lot where there was trash sort of in the weeds, and she sees this horribly tortured form severed in half. And in every version, she either runs away screaming to call the police, or she walks on thinking she's seen a mannequin, and then later on down the block realizes there may be something more to it. And so she calls the police and says, you better take care of this mannequin. And what she told me was completely contrary to that. And in fact, the body was thrown away with the trash in the weeds. It was hidden. This wasn't a killer who was trying to show to the world his work. He wasn't trying to instill panic or fear in the city. This wasn't like a Marvel Comics supervillain. And I think the fact that we believe that that's what he was, this was somebody who was posing the body in order to get maximum shock value, that was, his intention. From that fact alone have come this kind of myriad rogues gallery of suspects that everybody has discussed over the years. And we always start with this, wow, this guy really wanted to scare the world. It's like, Heath Ledger's Joker. He wants to see the world burn, and he's sending a message to us. Well, the truth is actually more mundane and in some ways scarier. This was a killer who his work was between him and his victim. And when he was done with her, he tossed her away in the weeds like trash and tried to hide her from the world. It's like every other serial killer victim that you ever read about. They discard their victims like they're nothing. And to me, in some ways, that's even more frightening. And what it did was it forced me to reset my expectations of who this killer was, what their motivation is, how they're operating. We have to kind of reset our whole perception of the case from that one fact that Betty Bersinger revealed to us.
Yeah, well said. And the fact that this is more frightening than that, like, Heath Ledger Joker want to burn the world down character is something that I feel like people really need to know when they're talking about the Black Dahlia, because they want that character to be responsible for this. And I don't know if they want that character to be responsible for this because it's easier to digest in the real world that there are people that will have a personal relationship with their victim. And when you relate the perpetrator to a fictional character, I think that's easier to digest, right? So this is something that's not going to touch you. And that's not the case with this, which makes it truly terrifying.
Exactly. And that's the thing is, like you just said, in some ways, if there's an agenda, if there's a motivation beyond just murder, if it's not just to inflict pain and suffering, if there's something there that they're trying to prove to the world, it does sort of fortify us. It makes us feel like we would never fall into the hands of somebody who was operating that way. We'd be able to perceive it. But the truth is, this was obviously somebody who befriended her, who seemed trustworthy at first, and then, evidenced their real face, which is, again, what we see over and over again with these kind of crimes.
So in what way does the idea of who the killer is differ, knowing what we know now about how Elizabeth's body was found?
You mean the profile of the killer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that what it demonstrates is this is far more mundane than we want to imagine. The Black Dahlia, because of the name, the exotic flower, the fame, the infamy of the murder, it's grown into such a legend. And so has the legend of who potentially could have killed her. And if you look at the suspects that people talk about, whether it's in 1947 or 1977 or today, almost every single suspect that's discussed or taken seriously has to fit within that framework of kind of a super genius, evil super genius, a doctor with unbelievable surgical skills who, had this secret evil side to him and was devious and cunning and a genius. And what I'm saying is it's not. It's somebody who's like any other serial killer. They're clumsy, they're awkward, they make mistakes, they're sick. It's far more mundane, which we don't want to believe because, as you pointed out, it's scarier thinking that these things, these people, and the victims to some extent are mundane because it means it could happen to us.
Ooh, you just said serial killer, some other serial killer. As far as we know, in this conversation right now, 14 minutes in, the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short, was killed by a person who might not have killed prior or since. So why did you use the word serial killer there?
That's a good transition there.
I worked on
that. Well, you guys are good at that. It's a great transition. Well, the point I'm making in the book is that this isn't just a portrayal of Elizabeth Short, and it's not just a portrayal of who I believe her killer is. It's actually a portrayal of a second woman named Leila Welsh, who in 1941 was murdered in Kansas City in what police refer to as strikingly similar circumstances to the murder of Elizabeth Short. And police were able to identify a man who personally knew both of those women and was in proximity to those women and was with those women frequently. This man also, and his name is Carl Balsiger, was with Elizabeth Short for 3 days before she essentially escaped to San Diego for a month right before her murder. So he is verified to have been with Elizabeth Short, and the book will explain also how he was with her a lot more than what the police were ever able to determine. And then proves that he also knew and was in constant proximity with this second murder victim, that the LAPD itself, back in 1947, all the way until the case went cold in the early 50s, was aware of this other murder and was investigating Carl Balsiger. He was literally at the top of their list in the last few years. They could not clear him. And there were certain aspects of his story that sent alarms and kind of kept their investigation going at full force. And a lot of those things are revealed in the book as well. So I believe that actually he was a fledgling killer in 1941, and by 1947 was much more experienced, which is why we see the Black Dahlia as it is.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Can you tell us a bit about who Leila was and about how she was murdered?
Yeah, so she was, as referred to in the title, she came from Kansas City real estate royalty. Her family was pretty influential in Kansas City. They had helped build, it really helped push the construction of the city and the expansion of the city. So they were a major family there, and they were very wealthy, and she was set to inherit a lot of money. However, her parents were really averse to the idea of her kind of growing up as a rich kid. So they moved 30 miles outside of town to a small village called Lee's Summit, where she was raised. And they lived very modestly. So she was a pretty humble person. They didn't spend money. They didn't live lavishly. But they were respected. And she was living with her mother and her brother in a house in kind of suburban Kansas City near the country club and the plaza. It sounds fancy, but it's actually not. It's a very middle class, lower middle class neighborhood. Very, pretty small homes that are kind of tightly packed, but family friendly. They seem to be quite happy there. She went to college when they moved into that house in Kansas City. She went to the University of Kansas City pretty soon after it first opened in the mid-1930s. And then she, in 1941, after she had graduated, she had spent a couple years in Illinois teaching grade school there, and then came back to Kansas City. She had started dating a guy a few years before. She's out at the circus with him on a Saturday night. He drops her off at the house on March 9th, 1941 at 1:30 a.m. She enters the house. She kisses her mother goodnight, goes to her room, closes the door, washes herself up for the night, and then goes into bed. But she does one fateful thing before she falls asleep. She opens her window. And she does that because the big furnace heater on is too hot. She wanted the cold air, and she opened it. And unfortunately, the screen had fallen off that window several months ago, so it was totally open. And about an hour later, somebody slipped through the window. They had to put their one leg over and the other leg over, and they were carrying implements of torture and death with them, which is really chilling. Later on, police would discover that whoever had done this had been waiting outside for hours in 31 degree weather. There was some light snow on the ground, and they had been waiting with all of the tools that they had kind of assembled and brought with them for this ultimate act, right? This wasn't just a random thing where somebody crawls through a window. They had been waiting specifically for her for hours. He slipped in, and then using a 4.5-pound, what's called a railroad track hammer, which is used to drive spikes in railroads, in when you're laying tracks for railroads, used that to smash her head. It did not destroy the skull, but it obviously incapacitated her. And then as she lay dying, he proceeded to mutilate and cut her up and destroy her. He also eviscerated her, meaning draining her of blood, or exsanguinated her. He drained the entire body of blood, which takes about 45 minutes to an hour. So her mother and her brother are asleep 15 feet away in adjoining rooms. The window is open. You can see into the room from myriad windows from houses next door, across the backyard. It's very, very open. And you would be able to see the killer, working at night if someone had looked outside their kitchen window or their bedroom window. And in fact, a 3-year-old boy who had been sleeping in the house next door awoke around 3 a.m., the same time that Marie Welsh, Leila Welsh's mother, woke up, because they heard the thuds from the railroad hammer, the track hammer, hitting Leila Welsh's skull. So he's in there for a good hour, hour and a half at the very least. We don't know how long he was really in there for, but at least an hour, hour and a half, draining of her body of blood, carving her up, and taking pieces of flesh out of her body. And then eventually escaped from the room. But what's really odd is that he left a trail of evidence that was just confounding to police. Usually when a killer enters a residence and proceeds to do what he's going to do, they take as much as they can with them, because obviously anything you leave behind that you've been holding or working with or had in your possession could potentially lead to your arrest. This is a killer who deposits everything, the gloves, the flesh, the hammer, the knives, the bloody towel he used, and other things as well, in a trail outside these backyards, kind of, and over the length of a couple streets. It's a very odd thing that we almost never see. And that ended up kind of making the case so complex that it, in essence, overwhelmed investigators.
Yeah, that's remarkable that trail of evidence and the physical things that came from that crime scene left investigators perplexed. That should be something that is like, wow, yeah, we got it all together. Like we're putting the puzzle pieces together here. But I got to back up a little bit. I'm going to play a little devil's advocate just for the sake of, the conversation. What are the odds that somebody is waiting outside in 32-degree weather for this one random night where the house is a little too hot, and hoping that she just happens to open her window to make it a little cooler in her room?
Yeah. So the person that would do that is somebody who was absolutely obsessed with her. Somebody.
So do you think that they were waiting there prior on other nights as well?
Yeah, I actually do. I think that this was somebody who was extremely familiar with the layout of those backyards, knew exactly where to hide in order to avoid as much detection as possible. So in that backyard and in towards Leila Welsh's window, there are 36 windows from neighboring houses that look directly in that spot, which is crazy, because if you're going to break into somebody's house and commit an action like this, it makes no sense to be, that exposed in public. And yet he did it anyway, which means this is somebody who is so intent on committing this act that they're willing to take the ultimate risk in order to achieve, in their eyes, the ultimate prize. So yeah, I mean, originally the killer's intention was to enter the other window. The window he ended up entering in is what is referred to as the east window. But initially, before she came home, and there were marks on the window that prove this, he had tried to jimmy open the other window in her bedroom, the north window. And as he was unable to open it, but he was able to he tried to remove the screen. And as he did, it got jammed, right? So he's trying to take it down. He's trying to move the screen and it gets jammed, and he gives up. And oh my God. Okay. Sorry. My daughter again just walked in. You can't hear this. Okay.
She loves doing this.
She always walks in when God.
Hold on.
God.
For anybody who's not familiar with this, Eli came on the show a month or so ago, and we did a few-part series on the Wonderland murders, which are absolutely brutal, horrific. It's the John Holmes in the adult film industry age of L.A., and he's going through the most graphic parts of this murder scene, and his daughter walks in. So just reference one of the last episode that we did with Eli. His daughter has an uncanny knack to enter into the room at the worst possible description time.
Yeah, I think she hears us talking, and she's kind of secretly intrigued with true crime. She's only 12, so I'm like, no, you're too young for this. So I always have to send her away. I think it's on purpose. So the killer had tried to take the screen off of the north window, and it didn't work. So he went behind the house and continued to wait for her. The intention, it seems, was he thought he could enter her room and wait for her to return from the circus, and would then kill her. He would alight from under the bed or in the closet or whatever. If he had been able to do that, he would have discovered immediately that there was really nowhere to hide. The bed, you couldn't hide under it, and the closet was way too small. It would have been a very different scene if he had actually gotten in the room. What he didn't realize at the time was that actually everything was lining up to help him, even though it was haphazard. He didn't know what he was going to do because he couldn't open the north window, and she didn't usually open her east window. She opened the north window, so he knew that was the window that was going to be open, which suggests he had been watching her, perhaps many times before. How many nights had he been outside watching her get ready, watching her disrobe, watching her go to bed, watching her sleep? This was a person who knew her routine and knew that north window would be opened up eventually, and that was the one she would likely leave unlocked, but it was locked. So she comes home and she goes to open the normal window that she usually opens, the north window. But the screen is jammed, and she can't open the window as a result. And that's from his actions. So instead, she opens the east window that doesn't have a screen. And all of a sudden, unwittingly, she has just opened her room up to this vicious killer.
That's horrifying.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned carvings and in her body, and I'm wondering about those and about the markings and carvings on Elizabeth Short's body and the similarities.
Okay, let's get into it. There's a lot. I don't know if we'll have time to go through all of them, but we'll go through some of the major ones. And by the way, just to understand the brutality of what was done to Leila Welsh, there were many mutilations and markings, but there's actually one mysterious one that has never been revealed to the public, and it's mentioned in the book. And that is that after the murder, the police were looking for a carving fork, the kind you use like at Thanksgiving, the two-tined carving fork that you put in the turkey and you carve it. They were searching the neighborhood and asking the neighbors about carving forks. And it's never been revealed why, but it's pretty obvious that there were some markings on her body that had been made with a carving fork. So that's just a small indication of the brutality of this crime. And I just want to set the table that this is, it's a pretty challenging case to read about. And that's sort of a little intro into it. So what was, like I said, there were several mutilations that were done to her body, but the most prominent one was the killer had taken her pajamas down, and he had proceeded to carve with a straight razor a 1-inch piece of flesh out of her thigh that was about 4.5 inches in diameter, that was horseshoe or bell shaped, depending on, what scientific lab investigator had reported. It was either horseshoe or bell shaped, right? It depends on the bulbous end, right? So this inch thick piece of flesh had on it skin, obviously, subcutaneous tissue, fat, and muscle. So it is literally just carving out of somebody an entire puzzle piece of flesh, if you will, a horseshoe-shaped piece of flesh. And there was no blood on the flesh or within the cavity from which it was taken out. And the reason that there was no blood in there was that the body had been exsanguinated. He cut her throat from in a V shape from kind of close to her ears down to a point that met at the bottom of her neck, right? That he used the butcher knife for. Out of that cut flowed a lot of her blood. A lot of blood had also come out of her skull from the track hammer that had been used to crack her temple. But there was a large amount of blood loss, which had pooled on the floor and then subsequently had leaked into the basement, which they found later on. But he stood there and waited for 45 minutes to an hour for that blood to drain out. So it appeared, and remember, again, her family is 15 feet away. They did wake up when he struck her with the hammer. Her mother woke up to check on things and went back to bed. But the light got turned on, light got turned off. You could hear her footsteps. And in addition, any neighbor that woke up and went to their kitchen or looked outside their bedroom window would have potentially seen him in there doing his quote unquote work. So it's really risky. He's in there for at least 45 minutes to an hour, just waiting for the blood to leave her body. And, in the next morning around 9 a.m., her mother reported that when she walked in, she could still hear the drips of blood coming out of the body onto the wooden floorboards. So he's in there waiting. And once it stops, essentially flowing after an hour, he proceeds to cut this piece of flesh out. And investigators believe that the reason is that he didn't want any blood within the cavity when he was cutting the flesh out. He wanted to be clear of blood. So within her thigh, within her leg, was this horseshoe-shaped missing piece that had no blood in it. It's a horrifying thought of what that must have looked like to her family and to investigators. And they would find that flesh later on in the day. What's interesting is Elizabeth Short, 6 years later, had carved out of her thigh the same thing, a 4.5, 5-inch diameter horseshoe or bell-shaped piece of flesh that had, was 1 inch thick, was made of skin, subcutaneous tissue, fat, and muscle. Literally the same piece in the same shape, with the same thickness and the same size, cut out in exactly the same way. A straight razor in a smooth arc. It was one motion that the killer used to create this puzzle piece of flesh. Exactly the way it was with Leila Welsh. A smooth arc using a straight razor. And again, with Elizabeth Short, she had been severed at the waist, and her, as is well known, her face was cut from the corners of her mouth towards her ears, similar to Leila Welsh. Leila Welsh was cut in a V down to her neck. Elizabeth Short was cut in a V from her mouth up towards her ears. So we see the same shape there. And then the killer of Elizabeth Short also waited for the body to drain of blood. He exsanguinated it, and only then did he cut out the horseshoe or bell-shaped piece of flesh from her thigh. And again, with Elizabeth Short, investigators found within the cavity no blood. So this was a killer who was, it was marked by blood avoidance in both cases. It's remarkable because we've never seen this before in any other murder. And yet it happens in these two murders 6 years apart, and both women are determined to have known very well this one man who came into contact with them.
Okay, so why the thigh?
I don't know. I think that's part of the killer's, psychopathy. It's part of their profile. Obviously, it is likely some kind of erogenous zone area that they're really attracted to. Now, the flesh that was taken out of Leila Welsh was in a slightly different part of her thigh from where Elizabeth Short's mutilation was. Though Short's mutilation, it's interesting, the piece of flesh that was taken out of her thigh, on it was where she had a tattoo of a rose. So I think that part of what it was, I think this is a killer who, first of all, he hates women and he hates femininity. He hates their sexuality. He hates probably his own frustration with his inability to consummate with women or to get women interested in him or whatever it is. But he wanted that rose specifically cut out of her. And I think he was attracted to doing what he did with Leila Welsh. But the rose was, something that was very attractive to him to have on the piece of flesh that he would then excise. Leila Welsh's was a little further up on the body. But, who knows? I think there was some part of him that was obsessed with cutting out a piece of flesh from their thighs.
Now, in Elizabeth Short's murder, he waited for her blood to drain, but there's a chance that he, I guess, had her in captivity for several days. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the central mysteries of the Black Dahlia case is where was she for the missing week before her body was found on January 15th? We know that she was last seen on January 9th at 10 p.m. at the Biltmore Hotel when she famously walked out and disappeared on Olive Street in downtown Los Angeles. And then her body is discovered on the morning of January 15th. So ever since the case broke, the head of homicide at the time and in the decades since, there's been so much speculation about where she was during the missing week, those 6 days. And there are a million theories. She was staying with a girlfriend, or she was trying to get back to this guy whose house she had been living at for a while. There were myriad sightings. I mean, tens of people who called in and said, I absolutely definitively saw her here. I saw her there. I saw her here. I saw her there, which would have been impossible. I mean, they placed her in 40 locations over over 5 days or whatever it is. But there is still a lot of speculation as where could she have been and why didn't whoever she was staying with reveal to the police where her locations were. And then police also speculated perhaps she'd been in captivity. But there were so many sightings and people believed that, she must have been somewhere and that would be the key to unlocking it. What I discovered in my research was that it was very obvious why she had returned to Los Angeles on January 9th from San Diego. And that's a big mystery too. Why did she go to San Diego a month earlier, the city she had never been to nor knew anybody in? And then why did she return to Los Angeles on January 9th? Well, in wondering what were her movements, why is she going here? Why is she coming back? The one person that nobody ever seemed to listen to was Beth Short. And in reading all her letters or correspondence, it becomes so very clear. She told her ex-boyfriend, on-again, off-again boyfriend, whatever it was, that she was returning to Chicago, where she had been right before LA. And she was going to model. She had been doing some hat modeling there, so she wanted to return to Chicago and do some hat modeling. The real reason she wanted to return is that this guy, Gordon Fickling, who she was trying to get back with, she kind of blew him off back in Long Beach in August, and he was pretty steamed about that. And he left, he went back east, and you could tell he's kind of trying to push himself away. But at some point in the fall, she decides she's made a huge mistake and she wants to get back together with him. Classic story, right? So she finds out through letters with him that he moves back to North Carolina, where he's from, my home state, very proud. And she finds out that he has just gotten a new route as an airline pilot flying from Charlotte to Chicago. And he's going to be there 3 or 4 times a week. And so all of a sudden, as soon as she finds that out in her letters, she starts writing him, telling him, by the way, if you want to reach me, don't write me in San Diego anymore. I'm moving to Chicago. It's so obvious what's going on, right? She wants to get back together with him, and she's putting herself in a position where they can meet up and start seeing each other again. That's obviously what's happening. So when she's done with San Diego at the end of a month, she's not coming back to Los Angeles to shack up with somebody or find a girlfriend that she can borrow her clothes from and hang out with. She's not going to, go back to the house that she'd been living in off and on throughout the fall. She returned to Los Angeles because the only bus to Chicago, the only bus route, which took like 3 days, left from Los Angeles. And where did the bus leave from? It left from downtown Greyhound bus station, Where did Beth Short request her with her ride? Where does she want to be dropped off in LA? She tells him to drop her off at the Greyhound bus station. So all these pieces begin to fit together, and the book really paints what I think is a much more realistic explanation of what she was doing those last few days, and the last few weeks as well, and what her movements were and what they meant, just using common sense. Remember, this is a 22-year-old woman. She's, she went out to LA. It was exciting. It was different. The weather was good. And she didn't like it. I mean, she literally said that to people, and she wanted to leave. And the idea was, I'm going to go to Chicago and see if I can't kind of resurrect this relationship that fell apart. That could happen today, she's not an exotic flower. There's no big secrets. She's not running around with the mafia. There's no abortion rings. There's all this kind of conspiratorial speculation. The truth is so mundane. It's the same way we operate today. And so I think that looking at the case through the eyes of a real person, you begin to figure out what they're trying to do and why they're here and why they're there, et cetera, et cetera. Man, that was a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's so good. It's so good.
Great.
We're riveted by the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think our audience is too. Yeah, big shout out to everyone listening live here. We're getting some great comments. People are saying very, very creepy story.
I'm nothing if not creepy.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
In the Valley of Kings just said, I'm not from the U.S. Let me pop that on there. I'm not from the U.S., but every time I hear someone mentioning Greyhound buses, it ends horrible somehow. That's very, very, very true.
God, that's so true, isn't it? Wow, that's a great line. I never thought about that, and that is such a good line.
True in true crime, for sure.
True crime. By the way, Greyhound's great. We're not talking.
Yeah.
We're not talking smack about Greyhound, but there have been a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Probably the best of the bus services.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You'll be safe, I'm sure.
Yes, and you can get 10% off by using promo code
with this
Sisters in Death.
Greyhound's never working with us.
No.
So when Elizabeth went to San Diego before all this went down, she was frightened by someone, and she told people around her. She called somebody a screwball.
Yeah.
And can you explain that a little bit? And do you think that is the killer?
Yeah, I do. So 1 month before Elizabeth Short escapes to San Diego, which has been this big mystery in the case, why did she go down there? There was this gap of 3 days that the police could not figure out where she was, what she was doing. They were able to track kind of every day who she came into contact with, her movements, her associations. Remember, this was a huge investigation. At one point, there were over 800, 900 investigators from, by the way, California State Highway Patrol. And I mean, it was the sheriff's department. It was the whole state kind of got involved in it. It was that big. They were searching for, all this evidence as to who she came into contact with and where she was exactly, especially the last couple of months. And they were able to determine almost, every day and almost everybody she came into contact with. They hunted all these people down. They questioned people. It's the 1940s. They get answers one way or the other. But there was a gap. There was a 3-day gap they couldn't figure out. It was between December 6, 1946 and December 9th, 1946. And right after, she makes this crazy move to San Diego, and nobody can figure out why she went. Well, I started thinking maybe it has something to do with what happened in those 3 days, right? She makes this desperate move. What would have led up to it? Whatever happened in those 3 days. And subsequently, the police discovered that there was a guy that she was with from Kansas City named Carl Balsiger, who had picked her up apparently on the morning of December 6th. He claimed that he met her at a real estate office on the Sunset Strip and said, "Hey, come along with me. I'm a salesman of bakery supplies, and I'm going up to Camarillo, which is this little town like an hour and a half north of Los Angeles. You'll hang out with me." And then he brings her back to LA, drops her off in a motel on Yucca Avenue in Hollywood. And then the next day he takes her to the bus station, but he wasn't really with her much. And he was just trying to do her a favor. And the police right away detected mistruths there, if you will. They knew that she was gone for 3 days. There was this 3-day black hole. And he claimed it was like a day and a half. They also went down to all those motels and hotels on Yucca. They searched all the hotels in Hollywood, actually, and there was no record of her. They showed photographs. There was no record of him, no record of her. They knew that that was a lie. So there were already immediately lies that they had detected in his story. And that started to send alarms going off. And that's what led to them investigating this guy. But what I subsequently found out in my research, and there was so much I found out that the police never found out about. He was not in Camarillo selling bakery supplies. And he was with her for 3 days, but not in the place that he told them. She wasn't in a motel on Yucca Avenue. And she wasn't with him at the supposed home that he told them he had on Sunset Boulevard, right near the Sunset Strip. In fact, he lived in a house in a remote canyon called Benedict Canyon, which is about 3 minutes drive north of Beverly Hills, but is a significantly different kind of world, especially at that time, than Beverly Hills. It's kind of mountainous and it's sort of a little spooky at times and mist shrouded. It's amazing homes there, but it has a kind of ignominious past. It's where the Manson murders occurred, and a whole bunch of other bad stuff. So it's always kind of had this weird juju about it. And, well, there's some, that's where he lived at the time. There were very few houses, a very remote location. And the police never found out that that was his real home. And he did everything he could to avoid the police ever coming near that home. Sorry. What do you do? Come on, they try to do everything. He tried to do everything he could to keep the police from ever coming near there. So they never found out about that home. They never found out about his real business up in Camarillo. And there were a lot of other things about him that they never found out as well. But that's one of the joys of research is, oh my God, 80 years later, I'm able to uncover the truth about what really happened there. And it's quite a story.
You know what? You had said something when we spoke about this the first time, her description of this person being a screwball.
Right.
And you had said that back then the term screwball is different than today, because when we call somebody a screwball, it's like, I'm sort of saying it in like a funny, joking way,
Right.
but the actual definition, according to Oxford Language Dictionary, is a crazy or eccentric person.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
she's very much saying, hey, this crazy guy, I know this crazy guy's in my life here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I look like a screwball now, too, because I'm smiling only because my wife is getting my daughter to go away.
Bring the whole family in.
I know. I'm sorry. This is really unprofessional.
It's all good.
So, yeah, that's exactly right. When she left him, and she didn't leave in the way the police thought, she left at midnight from a bus station in Hollywood, in Cahuenga and Sunset. It's not a great neighborhood back then. I mean, listen, Hollywood can be pretty wild today, but especially back then, it's pretty seedy at midnight. And why would she be leaving on a 6-7 hour bus ride at midnight to go down to San Diego, a city she had never been in, she didn't know anybody in, and she also had no money. When she arrived in San Diego, she was essentially homeless and penniless, and she ended up going to a movie theater and falling asleep in there to figure out what the hell she was going to do. So she arrives in really bad shape. And when she was on the phone with somebody she knew several days later, they asked her, what the hell are you doing in San Diego, of all places? And she said she essentially had to get away from a bothersome screwball. And as you pointed out, a screwball back in the 1940s is somebody who's not right in the head. It's somebody who's off and somebody who scares you. And she was, again, we haven't done, in all these years of research, we haven't done a good enough job of listening to Elizabeth Short. That word is so important. It means she was with somebody who scared her. And the fact that she left at midnight, it tells you everything. She wanted to get the hell away from this guy. And she went to San Diego because she didn't want to be in his proximity and didn't want him anywhere near her. And it's, you know, when you read the book, you'll understand a lot more about what happened in those 3 days and where she very likely was either held or was sort of compelled to stay with him. And then all of a sudden she escapes, and a month later she's murdered. So, you know, I think all of that will kind of clear up in the book for you.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. And I think that you make a compelling argument. Now, do we know why, though, that she referred to him as a screwball?
We don't. And I think that it was something that he likely took to his grave. Something happened in those 3 days. She was with him. But here's the interesting thing. Beth Short was very social. She was always in touch with people. She wrote her mother all the time. Her mother was in Massachusetts, but she sent letters all the time. She sent letters to a lot of people. And in fact, when the police discovered her luggage and her trunk afterwards, they were stuffed with letters from other people, but also letters she had written that hadn't been sent yet, right? Like in a stack. She was always in communication. And when Carl Balsiger took her to Camarillo and claimed that he brought her back a day or a day and a half later, his story was always changing, even though we know that he was with her for 3 days. He claimed that he deposited her back in Hollywood, but she knew a lot of people in Hollywood and nobody heard from her. In those 3 days, she didn't make one phone call. She didn't send one letter. She didn't try to get in touch with anybody. She just went black. And that is completely out of character for her. She doesn't go off for days at a time with a guy. Now, she moved out to Long Beach to live with Gordon Fickling, but even when she moved in with him, she was seeing other guys and going out and partying, not partying, but, you know, going out to a bar, a nightclub with a friend, going to the pharmacy down the street, David Lander drugs, which figures into the story in a big way later on. But, you know, she was a very social person and she needed human contact quite frequently. It just is totally out of character for her to just disappear for 3 days. It didn't have, even when she was in San Diego, ostensibly kind of in hiding, right? And living with another family, but she's trying to lay low, it seems. She's still writing letters every day. She's still making phone calls. You know, she's interacting with men she met in San Diego. She meets new friends. She's friends with the family she's staying at. It's completely out of character. Something was off in those 3 days, and we'll never find out exactly what it was.
Now, why did she come back in contact with him?
So the reason I believe that she did, the one thing about Carl Balsiger that was a plus for her, was that he had given her money. And we know that on several occasions. He paid for her last week's rent. That's why he picked her up that morning and took her to Camarillo. She was leaving the apartment, the rooming house she was in, which she shared with like 6 or 7 other women, all living in one room in stacked bunk beds. I mean, that's how it was in Hollywood in 1947. There was a housing shortage and people were crammed in. So we know that he paid for her rent. We know that he paid for several other things. And the book goes, I won't go into detail about that right now, but the guy had a bit of money and he had paid for things. When she returned from San Diego to Los Angeles on January 9th, this very famous night, the night that she disappears forever, at least, you know, until her body is found 6 days later, she had returned to Los Angeles to take the bus from Greyhound to Chicago. The problem was she didn't have $1 to her name. Now, this is in character for Beth Short. It is like her to show up and then figure out, how am I going to get the money for a bus ticket? But that's literally what happened. And in the research I did, I discovered that if you wanted to go from Los Angeles to Chicago in 1947 via bus, which was cheaper than train travel and certainly a lot cheaper than air travel, you would have to pay $36.85, which in today's money is like $500. It's a lot, maybe even more. It's a lot of money. And it was like a 3.5 day trip through multiple cities of the Midwest. It's a major trip. So she was out of money. And one of the things that she had done in the last few days is contact some people and see if she could get spotted and she would pay them back, yada, yada, yada. On January 8th, and this is a little detail that nobody ever seems to fixate on or focus on. It's in the original district attorney files with testimony taken from the guy who had given her a ride back. He mentions on January 8th, 1947, the day before they returned to Los Angeles, that very famous day, that they were in San Diego together, and she started making calls on a payphone outside of a cafe to somebody back in Los Angeles. And when she returned from those phone calls, she had changed her plans. She said, I want to return to Los Angeles tomorrow. That is such an important detail because before she was planning on returning to Los Angeles on January 8th. But then she makes these phone calls to some mystery man in Los Angeles and says, no, tomorrow we're going to return. And that's exactly what happened. Whoever she was calling in Los Angeles was the person she was going to meet in order to get the money for that bus ticket. And the man who would have that money, the only person who spotted her, the only person who gave her cash pretty much on a regular basis was Carl Balsiger. So I think what happened was she realized in order to check out of the Hotel California, she needed to get the money to get that bus ticket to Chicago. And the only guy that she could get it from was Carl. And I think what she figured was, he's a screwball. There's something wrong with this guy. But if I meet him downtown at a hotel or a restaurant or whatever, I can get the money and I'm not going to get trapped going back to his house or getting in trouble or whatever it is. I can control the situation, which again, we've seen so many times with victims and with perpetrators, in certain situations where your gut instinct is going off, something is wrong with this person, but you figure you can control the situation. And I think that's what happened. She needed the money. She needed to get the hell out of LA. She didn't want to stay there. And the only guy who could pay for it might have been a little bit of a screwball and might be a little off, but if I can meet him somewhere downtown in public, I can get the money from him and I can be on my way. And it didn't turn out that way.
So this killer, this screwball that you propose, was he as close to Leila Welsh as he was to Elizabeth Short?
Yeah, I would actually say in some ways closer.
Closer to Welsh.
To Welsh, yeah. And by the way, Carl Balsiger, the LAPD, and people still believe that Elizabeth Short only knew Carl Balsiger for those 3 days. And what the book proves from other people I spoke to who had known those folks, he actually met her well before that. And they had actually seen each other on more than one occasion in the months leading up to that those fateful 3 days. Leila Welsh is a very different situation. And what I was able to discover, like the LAPD was trying to figure out even with the limited amount of information they had about this strikingly similar murder to Elizabeth Short, LAPD was trying to figure out if Carl Balsiger knew Leila Welsh, because then that would put him, within kind of arm's reach of two women who had both been killed in strikingly similar ways. And they were never able to determine that. And in fact, Balsiger lied to them and told them he never knew Welsh. They probably just went to University of Kansas City at the same time, but there's a lot of people there. But he never copped to knowing her. So the LAPD figured, well, there's no way we'd be able to ever find out if he knew Leila Welsh, and he says he didn't know her, so let's move on. But what I was able to determine through pretty extensive research was that not only did Carl Balsiger know Leila Welsh, but their lives and their families' lives kind of overlapped in myriad ways for about 10 years before she was killed. They both were prominent families. They both went to Second Presbyterian Church in Kansas City at the same time when Leila Welsh went with her kind of very well-established, important grandmother. The Balsigers went to the same church. They both went to the same kind of lake cottage area. Her boyfriend his family had a lake house that was a quarter mile away from Balsiger's lake house. And this is a very tight community. So she was there at that lake house all the time in the summer of 1940, going to the dances with this pretty small community at the exact same time that Carl Balsiger was there. and going to all these dances. In addition, the boyfriend, Richard Funk, was an officer in the Demolay organization at the same time as Carl Balsiger. And there were constant dances that they all threw. And so Richard Funk, the boyfriend, would bring Leila to that. They were, Richard and Carl were in the same kind of fraternal organization for years. They knew each other very well. They both went to the same high school. Leila Welsh and Carl Balsiger went to the same college. And in fact, at college, they had the same circle of friends. They both went Greek. She was in a sorority. He was in a fraternity. They were at the same dances. They were at the same events. And in fact, in the book is a photo of Leila Welsh's best friend standing next to Carl Balsiger and eyeing him very suspiciously, mind you. But right there is her best friend right next to him. And many other ways that their worlds sort of overlapped and intersected. This was kind of an elite group in Kansas City. And there were, all these families knew each other. These people grew up together. He had watched her grow up and was there for every step of her life, or, the majority of it. So, lots of overlap there. Again, the LAPD was never able to determine that. But now, through the magic of modern research, we can absolutely verify that.
Yeah, I mean, that is wild. I mean, I think everyone probably has some experience in like knowing of people in your town, but not necessarily like really knowing them, but like they're out there, you're kind of connected, you're in the same area. So I think it's totally reasonable, more than reasonable to think that they, knew each other and he knew of her. Obviously knew of her. And I guess my question, and there's a question here in the chat from Shark Shell, what would be the motive for him to kill Elizabeth? And I guess let's extend that to Leila too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and the book actually goes into detail about that. It's a pretty layered answer, though. And, it's interesting, at the time in the 1940s, I was reading this and I was struck by how different the police thought back then than they do now. And by the way, they had an early form of criminal profiling back then. They had psychologists that would create these kind of composite, images of who this person was and what was motivating them. It's not like, it's the 16th century or something. They're pretty advanced with regard to human psychology and abnormal psych. But they're not that advanced. And one of the things that kept coming up in both murders was, why would he do this? It wasn't for sex. It wasn't for, he hadn't robbed them. It wasn't, he just blew up at them or they pissed him off and he went crazy. The motivation eluded them. And subsequently, and unfortunately, because, American history in the last 50 years is replete with horrific serial killers and murders that we can't explain, we now understand that it's the psychopathy of it. He murdered her because he wanted her destroyed. He was willing to take the risk to mutilate her and cut her and destroy her because there was something inside of him that was crying out for that, this need to destroy. And the motivation, I don't think, is much beyond that. I think he watched Leila Welsh for many years, was enchanted by her beauty and her grace, which everybody talked about, her warmth. The police kept saying over and over again, everybody loved her. She didn't have an enemy. Who would do this? Why would they do it? And the point I'm making in the book is that's exactly why he did it. Because she was perfect in his eyes. She was perfect in everybody's eyes. In so doing, she became this, vessel of perfection, and something that he probably began to worship and hate at the same time because of certain aspects of himself. And as a result, became consumed with the need to degrade, destroy, mutilate, and exsanguinate and eviscerate this person. And likewise with Beth Short, similarly beautiful and graceful. People found her charming. She was actually a very sweet and shy girl. But I think there were aspects of Elizabeth Short, ironically, that he saw in himself. And one of the things the book does is show that there are some similarities in personality between Elizabeth Short and Carl Balsiger. Weaknesses in they kind of share the same weaknesses, if you will. And so his motivation in murdering her may have sort of been the opposite of Leila Welsh. He saw Leila as this object of perfection that he could never have, never be good enough for, never attain to. But in Beth Short, he may have seen a reflection of the things he hated about himself. And when she came to him needing money, he snapped, because here's this, this woman who has kind of burned him before. She disappeared down to San Diego. She's gotten money from me before. I think something snapped, and he was able to kind of fulfill his greatest, sickest fantasies that had been in his head for many, many years, in a horrific 6 days that she was held in captivity.
I can't help but picture the scene where he wants her to get into his car because he wants to kill her, and she just wants money from him. Yeah. And there's some kind of struggle, like not necessarily a physical struggle, but some kind of coercion, no, let's go to the diner. And he's like, no, hop in the car and I'll give you the money. Yeah.
Exactly. And which, by the way, we've seen so many times, right? Like how many stories of serial killers and their victims and how they operated. It's the exact thing. They ask you to do something that you're slightly uncomfortable with, but it's going to be, like Silence of the Lambs, right? The beginning is James Gumb is by his van. Will you help me put the couch into the van? I think she saw him in the car and he said, come on, get inside. I'm just going to drive down the street to the diner. I'm going to give you your money, whatever it is. And she's, she thinks, well, I don't want to be alone with this guy, but it is just down the street. I can probably take care of it. If anything happens, I can jump out or scream or whatever. And then, the rest is history.
Wow. Yeah. Eli, this has been an incredible conversation here tonight. I think our audience very much into it as well. And Goodbye Horses says In the Valley of the Kings from Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. By the way, Goodbye Horses is one of my favorite songs of all time. I probably listen to it way too frequently, so kudos to you.
You probably do.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Well, I want to just ask you, this is a mystery, one of the coldest murders that this country has. What is the good that comes from piecing these puzzle pieces together?
Yeah. I think for me, the biggest benefit of doing all this is like, there's a bunch of other suspects that, obviously have been a lot of attention have been paid to them. And there's people who fall. The Black Dahlia arena is like a blood sport. You have people who believe this guy's a suspect, that guy's a suspect, this happened. And they go at it. People are constantly fighting and name calling, and they get very kind of attached to their suspect or whatever. To me, it's less important whether people believe this voluminous body of evidence is presented in the book. The more important thing, listen, that's obviously very important, and that is kind of the core of the book. And I believe that Carl Balsiger is responsible for both of these murders. But set that aside for a second. If people come away from this book with a greater understanding of Elizabeth Short and Leila Welsh, and understand how Elizabeth Short's character has been so maligned over the years and still is. I don't know of any other murder victim that has had the truth about her life, her personality, her character as distorted as Elizabeth Short. And one of the most important aspects of this whole thing for me was like, let's set the record straight. Let's look at who she really was. And then let's go through all of the things that people have said and continue to say about her and prove them wrong. And show that she was no different than any of us at 22 years old. And that is scary because, it makes us all feel vulnerable. But put aside the vulnerability. Let's honor and respect and understand who she was, and not just as a victim. Everybody always refers to her as the victim. Let's understand her as a 22-year-old woman who had hopes and dreams and ambitions. And really, at the end of the day, the only thing she wanted was to be loved. That's what she was looking for. You know, her origin story really tells us why. But she just wanted to be loved. It's what everybody wants. That's what she was looking for. She's just like us. And if we start from that and understand who she was as a real person, you know, if we can at least begin to understand that part of it, then the book will be a success for me.
Wow. Well said, Eli. That is a perfect sentiment to end this evening on, and we wish you congrats on your book's release tomorrow. I hope the reaction is bigger than you expect. I mean, if we're any indication of the interest out there, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are really compelled by this work, and maybe consider the Black Dahlia case solved after this, and Leila Welsh's murder as well. So
I really appreciate that. That is high praise. I really appreciate that.
Well, honestly, we appreciate the work that you've done because, again, this story has been circulating forever, right?
Yeah.
And to finally read something and to be like, oh my, like this is totally different and backed up.
Yeah.
I think what got me to be so committed to reading this book was Tim telling me how many source notes you had in your book. I'm thumbing through it right now. Like your book, there's 50 pages of source notes. You know, you're not just like going off of like some tangent here.
Right, exactly. But by the way, like that part of doing the book was like 2-3 weeks of just hell. I was like, my whole life for 12 hours a day was like doing this page and this thing. But I wanted to make sure that everything was documented to show, like, do you want to know where this comes from? This is literally said in this place, this place. It's super important to me. So yeah, I'm glad you guys saw that too. That's cool.
Yeah. Let me tell you something. I read every page, every word of it too. And I think a lot of people will, because it, like you said, it's important, I think, to people to know where all that stuff came from too.
Yeah, right on. I really appreciate it.
It's expertly spun into the story too. All those sources, like it's kind of amazing to me that it's all spun into, like, sometimes multiple sources into one sentence. Like it's pretty impressive stuff.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I really do. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. And
I loved it. Let's do this every night. I love it.
For sure.
It's my people.
You want to do Wonderland Murders next?
Hell yeah, I do.
Live Wonderland Murders.
Yes.
Forever will be haunted by that now.
That's right. That's Hal Glickman. Yeah.
Well, Eli, thank you so much. We will be keeping our eye out on the reaction, and certainly let us know if what happens.
You got it. I'll be in touch soon about all that. I appreciate it.